I am delighted to have John Lilly and Hiten Shah here on the stage. You are getting free consulting right now. You guys didn't know that. These are two of the smartest guys, not only in Silicon Valley, but in the world of startups, and how to make things work, and how to figure out what's working, and so on. Hiten first crossed my path, I think when we did that Facebook class, that infamous Facebook apps class that I taught with Dave McClure. And you provided some of the infrastructure to help the teams figure out what was working and, frankly, get millions of users, right?
Yep.
How many millionaires did you help make?
I have no idea.
But some.
Can't talk about it.
Can't talk about it. John Lilly, you and I were in graduate school together.
I was your TA.
He was my TA. And George Kemble and I were on a team. George, who's the founder of the D School, and John was our teaching assistant in that course. So that was kind of interesting. John is now a venture capitalist. Before that, he was, did they call you president or CEO? CEO of Mozilla Foundation, or Firefox, essentially. Before that, he started and ran a software company. Hiten has always been in the world of metrics, Crazy Egg, KISSmetrics, mostly KISSmetrics these days, right?
Yep, that's right.
Very good. And you saw Vinay use the Crazy Egg tool.
And KISSmetrics.
And KISSmetrics to figure out, wasn't that kind of interesting how fast he got to some of those answers? Okay, so let's frame, just in the last break, one of us came up to me, said, here is my issue, here's my problem. How did you state it? And you probably can't tweet this, but you know. Okay, among us.
Since the break, I wrote a poem to succinctly say our problem.
Right.
I want to take a baby step, but thinking of it makes me sweat. Instead, I make a lazy bet on guesses that I may regret. Now here I am, my stance too wide, doing an awkward dance with my legs apart from side to side. Is there a chance to turn the tide? So our little mobile startup is... Thanks. Our little mobile startup asked BJ for a phone call a few months ago, 6-8 months ago, and he said, take baby steps. Don't do an app, do interactive email, novel, ironically so. And I wasn't able to convince our CEO, so we made an app, and I feel like we've taken this big step, and we've showed about 4 people, and now like pulling our stance in is really tough. So what do we do? How do we turn the tide?
Okay, thank you. And that's the whole reason we're having this panel. You know, so we don't have to convince you all. You've seen over and over and over, that baby steps is a winning strategy, behavior change, product rollout, and partnerships. The thing that I think is going to be the challenge is going back to your jobs, your colleagues, your project, your CEO, and if they're doing things in not such a great way, helping them move forward in the right way on that. So before we get to this, so we'll use that sort of as the symbol, the issue. We will take cases from the audience in a few minutes. So if you have a specific case, whether it's true or not, that you want to pose, mostly to them, I'll chime in when I can, but really you guys, you can. So we'll have some mics. Who's got mics that can distribute? Okay, so my team, please be aware, we'll do it in a few minutes. Before we dive into that, John, how did you get to where you are? You have had a really fascinating journey from Stanford, CS 106 person to teaching assistant to tell us about you.
Well, so I'm an engineer by background and a user interface designer. That's where I met BJ, is in trying to think about how to build user interfaces that people cared about, kind of before design was in. You know, I don't know. You know, I just I followed my heart, more or less. I did things that I cared about, more or less, and I tried to put myself around people that I liked. And that's probably the key. You know, my partner at Greylock is a guy named Reid Hoffman. He started LinkedIn, and I've known him and collaborated with him for a million years now, maybe almost 10, since before he started LinkedIn. And I'll tell you, he and I both, like what we try to do is we just try to put ourselves around people that we think are awesome. And then try to be open to the experiences and open to the opportunities that come from there. And I think, honestly, everybody I know who's successful at all in Silicon Valley does some form of that, trying to put yourself in places where there are interesting people. I really believe it's real hard to say, you know, look into the future and say, I want to do exactly this and make my career path go on that way. But if you're around good people, it kind of happens automatically.
Interesting. Now, with your move to Mozilla, which is an incredibly, wow, what a position, right? Tons of responsibility. And I imagine the organization, it was really hard to sort of I mean, how was that running that organization?
Yeah, well, Mozilla's interesting, right? We're a nonprofit, and we're this big organization that's way more people, it's open source, and so many more people contributed code and participated in translated in the browser into different languages than actually worked for us. And so in a lot of ways, in some ways it was really hard, in some ways it was really easy. Like at some level, people found us. They really wanted to make the change, right? Mm-hmm. They wanted to live the change. And one of my favorite guys, this guy Naji, he lived in Hanover, and he grew up in Ulaanbaatar, and he really wanted, when he moved from Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia to Hanover to go to graduate school, and he really wanted his parents to be able to email him. Yeah. But they only spoke Mongolian. And so he translated Firefox and Thunderbird into Mongolian. And that was the small change that he made. And it's not like you're not going to be in the front of the New York Times for translating anything into Mongolian, probably. But for the 10,000, because only 10,000 people a day use it, right? But for those 10,000 people, it makes the difference between being on the web or not. And so, like, for him, like, nobody told him what to do. Nobody, like, made him do something. He just figured out what the right thing to do was and did it. And so on that level, it's really easy. On this other level, it's kind of hard because, you're not using the traditional command and control structures. And so what I found is that this is my second time as a CEO, and what I find, and I'd be interested to hear what you think too. Sure. I found that the chief job of a CTO is to tell the story again and again and again and again. And to tell it to recruits, and tell it to partners, and tell it to employees, and tell it to the press, and tell it in a simple way that's the same, that's understandable, to try to get everybody kind of going in the same direction.
Okay. How did you reach consensus at Mozilla on topics?
Well, we didn't always.
Okay.
And I don't think consensus is all that important in a technology company. I think that clarity is.
Yeah.
I think that. I think it's interesting. I think that you do a lot of talking, a lot of persuading, and again, a lot of telling the story. So if you tell the story and you talk about your mission, like a lot of it, you did it just a minute ago, which is how do you set the frame, and how do you make sure that everybody understands the frame for how you make decisions? And at Mozilla, the mission was always to make the web more participatory. Yeah. And I swear to God, I said that probably 10 times a day, kind of no matter what we were doing. And if you had a decision to make, you'd say, well, does this help our mission or hurt it? And it always brought it back to the central thing.
So if somebody came to you with an idea,
yeah.
So we don't have the CEOs of huge companies here. We have CEOs of mid-size and small. Yeah. So let's assume most people have to go and get buy-in from their CEO. As a CEO, what persuaded you when somebody came to you and said, guess what, we've been doing it wrong, or here's a better way to do it?
Well, so in general, I'm not very sympathetic when somebody says, we're fucking this up.
Okay.
So in my first job out of school, that's almost all that I said. So I said, well, this sucks, and we're screwing this up, and we're screwing this other thing up. But then I went and started my own company. What you realize when you start your own company, I'm sure you've seen this too, is that everything is the way it is because somebody took time and made it that way. And you're like, oh shit, this is why my CEO, Joe, was always pissed every time I said it was all broken. It's because I wasn't being constructive. I didn't say, here's how I think it should be, and here's how I think we can make it that way. And so for people who just come and say it's broken, I'm almost never very sympathetic. For people who say, I think we can do this better this way, and I think of that, the ones that say, I think that because of this, I'm say, well, good God, man, go, run, and let's change that. The ones that I have to help I have to say, why do you think that? Yeah. And often they don't quite know, and that's why you really look for data. So I think the best CEOs, one of my favorite phrases, this Andy Grove phrase, like the best people, especially in startups, are the ones who fight like you're right and listen like you're wrong. And so I think the best CEOs that I've ever worked with are truth seekers. Like they have a point of view, and they believe they want the world to be this way, but they're always looking for things that prove that their assumptions are wrong. And if they're wrong, they change.
Yeah, great. Come back to that.
Yes.
Hiten, from your position, your point of view, explain a little bit about what you're doing with KISSmetrics, size of the company, the kinds of people you interact with, and so on. I think you've got a bunch of connections around the Valley and around the world.
Yeah. I'll actually start when I was 6 years old because I think that'll help give context. My father told me I should be an entrepreneur. He's a physician, and that's what basically kicked everything off for me. And from there, there's something about him that I've always aspired to be more like, which is he'll give without thinking about what he's going to get. So he's more selfless than anybody. I can only hope to be that selfless. So for me, everything starts from that. And that's my kind of personal life. But over time, basically, I tried doing lots and lots of different things in terms of entrepreneurially. And one of the first things I started was basically this was after college. I made some money in college, but we don't have time for that story. And when I got out of it, we started a consulting company. This was actually my brother-in-law and I. He was still in high school at the time, had one customer paying him $3,500 a month.
That was before he was your brother-in-law?
Yeah, that was before he was my brother-in-law.
Just
totally.
getting the time frame clear here. Okay, yeah.
I've known him since he was 11, and I was 15. So known him a long time. And got out of college, started that business. Since it was a consulting company doing like SEO and stuff like that, we got really into analytics and metrics and things like that. And from there, we realized very early that we wanted to build products. Neither of us were technical, like John, so we ended up hiring lots of people, probably 70 to 100 different design shops, agencies, developers, and this was back in about 2003 all the way till about 2005, 2006. And we actually got lucky with one of our products. We tried to build 20 different products. My famous story is I lost $1 million trying to build a hosting company that never launched.
Okay, pause for a second. Don't lose your train of thought. So you really tried 20 different things?
Yeah.
Interesting. Keep going.
Yeah, and these are all like from $1 million on that hosting company to like 50 grand on some random idea. And throughout that whole process, I think we learned patterns that a lot of other entrepreneurs learn once they do 2 or 3 companies. A lot of them John mentioned, and I've always been seeking a better way, and that's basically what happened after that. And with KISSmetrics, it's basically my second sort of internet SaaS company. This one's funded. We're about 20 people now. We raised about $4 million so far, and are dealing with all kinds of challenges, just like all entrepreneurs do. But one of the key things is, and the key thing that John said is at the end, towards the end, was that he mentioned the word assumption. And I think I want to highlight that in the case of this stuff, which is everything should start as a hypothesis with assumptions against it.
For example?
For example, we think of all the way from a new marketing channel. There's some hypothesis on what it's going to do for us, and we have assumptions around, kind of how many customers, what metrics, what kind of conversion rates, all that kind of stuff, all the way to a new feature. Mm-hmm. It starts as a hypothesis. This type of customer has a problem doing this or that. And we sort of break things down into kind of tiny baby steps, essentially, using that process. So, my suggestion to the gentleman that kicked it off is simply, can you get your company, the challenge is to get a company thinking like that. Because, unfortunately, I don't think we as human beings actually think like that. From a, this is a hypothesis. I'm not right, actually, and I just think I'm right, or this is my guess, essentially, and then having a scientific process to actually determine whether you're right or wrong.
Within the company, do you actually call it a hypothesis?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. Explain a little bit about KISSmetrics. Not everyone knows
Sure.
what you do.
Yeah, so KISSmetrics is basically, it helps you understand your customers using basically data and analytics. We're in a world today where data is everywhere. There's user level, customer level data, and it's in all different kinds of places. So we help you collect it and put it all in one place. Mostly we deal with websites and e-commerce and software as a service businesses, and then help you analyze that. Things like revenue, lifetime value, where your most profitable customers are coming from, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Let me pose one case, kind of the most general case, and I see this a lot of time in my work outside of Stanford. Big brand company, they want to innovate, they know that mobile matters, they know, they've read the press, they've gone to TED, what have you. But when it comes to actually innovating, so they have a concept, they develop a big business plan, lots of slides, they hire McKinsey, they do all of this work, they're doing this, what I call the big brain problem. They think and think and think and think. And then when they come to me, and they usually come to me at a point where they might be in trouble, it's like, well, let's try stuff really fast, and it just freaks them out. And if they get it, and often it's sort of the weird people, not weird, it is the more free-thinking people that are usually my contacts. They're like, yeah, we'd love to, but our company doesn't work that way. We can't try this. It'll hurt our brand or whatever. So How would you advise people in that situation where they're going to go back home, the history of the company, the infrastructure, just the way things are done are not set up to do things quickly, to set up hypotheses and test them and turn them over and so on. We'll start with you, Hiten. What would be your general and specific advice for people?
You know, I think the things that I've seen that are most successful in large companies and small companies when they're trying to change something is, one simple one is just smaller teams. So if you can say, hey, I just need a small team with 3 to 5 people, and I want to work on this problem, and I have this amount of time, or I want this amount of time in this budget, that's usually helpful to at least carve out kind of a group of people that can make a decision faster. Right? That's your goal in doing that, and hopefully they have the same sort of buy-in process. And then the second piece of that would be actually helping people feel the pain.
Go further.
Or understand the pain. So, you know, the gentleman earlier, I think you probably feel like, and again, I'm projecting, so, you know, whatever, that your company wasted time and money and resources and all kinds of stuff building this iPhone app when there's probably a way you could have tested whether it was the right thing to do or the right thing for the market much faster. So if you can get someone in the company that has budget, essentially, to feel that pain and offer a solution to them, I've seen that work. I've seen that work in small companies and large companies, but it's really hitting on, look, this is our risk of not doing it this way based on how we've done it in the past. Yeah.
John, your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I have a few. So for the record, like I haven't worked in a lot of big companies, so I would probably get fired in many of them. So I just take it for it's worth what you pay for it. So, you know, I think mostly so first of all, I think having a hypothesis about what things need testing and what things are testable. Like, so I think I think there's a couple of things. I think testing often only gets you to a certain place. It gives you to certain local maxima. And so I think that that's one thing to just be aware of. So some things can be tested, some things can get better. I think web apps and things like that, you know, whether this works or that works is pretty easy to test in general. I think things like, you know, will people want an iPad is actually pretty fundamentally hard to test. Yeah. And so I think being aware of the limits, but having a hypothesis and trying to think about what questions you really need answered is the first step. And then I would just try things generally. So, you know, I think that in today's world, you know, it's very, very easy to get to millions of people through Twitter, or, you know, millions of people through Tumblr or Facebook, or, you know, there's any number of ways that you can quickly mock something up and then see whether it resonates or not. I think consumer behavior in particular, and I think especially as regards our health, and consumer behavior is super unpredictable. So I think that, you know, I don't know whether the Nike Fuel Band will work or not, but one of these things is going to work for some unpredictable reason at some level. And so having a willingness to test and then being able to collect enough data to say, well, I was trying to figure out whether this worked, and here's what I did, and I map it against, and not asking for permission quite so much.
Okay. Let me flip to sort of the opposite size structure. You're in a 2-person startup, and the person that your co-founder wants to be in stealth mode and wants to think and build and add features. No, we're not launched. We're going to get it perfect before we go out the door. And you're like, no, let's try some of this stuff out. How would you deal with John, we'll start with you. How would you deal with that case?
Well, I think in a really small company, you just got. I wouldn't do a lot of stuff without asking permission in a really tiny company. I would hash it out. I think that especially with a co-founder or 2 or 3 or 4 people, it's really important you're all pretty well on the same page, because you're mostly sitting in the same room staring at each other all day. So I would really spend time trying to figure out what you were trying to do and what you were trying to learn and what you were trying to get to. And I think that the truth is there's very few companies that do exactly what they started doing. You know, we were the last investor in Instagram, for example, and you know, Kevin and Mike, like, they thought they were going to build this big app to do lots of different things, lots of sharing and social networks, but on mobile. And it just turned out that as they looked at the data, their hypothesis was wrong. Yeah. They're like, oh shit, all people are doing is like sharing photos. Maybe we should just do that. And so, you know, they were trying to find truth, trying to be successful, and they had a lot of, it took them a long time to figure this out. It looks simple in retrospect, but, you know, one of the things I remind everybody of is, like, I'm not sure who to attribute it to, but one of my favorite sort of mottos is the next big thing is always beneath contempt.
Say that one more time.
The next big thing is always beneath contempt.
Okay.
And the implication is it's beneath contempt until it isn't. And you know, we're investors in Facebook too, which will go public tomorrow. And like Facebook for the longest time looked like a site that you're going to go hook up with somebody on campus, right? It didn't look like a $100 billion IPO or whatever it'll be. So we'll see.
So you have some portfolio companies you've invested in, and I know you also advise some companies. I'm not sure if anybody can get on your radar anymore unless it's, I know you used to. You help a bunch of startups and people. How would you advise that team? So say the co-founders come to you and say, here's where we're at. One of us wants to be public about what we're doing, launch quickly, or just put it out there. Another person says, no, I think somebody's going to steal the idea. It's such a special idea. I would just
start breaking down assumptions. I mean, it's just the same thing.
For example,
you start saying, why are you in stealth? What do you have to launch with? What's the simplest thing that you can do? What's the point? Like, why does anybody give a damn about the app at all? And so really start breaking down, and try to get to assumptions. You know, my first startup, Reactivity, I was the CEO, and then we hired another CEO from HP in, and he's this amazing guy, and I really think highly of him. He almost fired me about 4 different times the first year he was there. And it's because we'd have these meetings, and he'd say, well, our near-term priority is X. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Our near-term priority is this other completely different thing. And it turns out that when he said near-term, he meant like 18 months. And when I said near-term, I meant like 3 days, right? And so once we figured that out, we're like, oh shit, like when we're talking, we may not have the same vocabulary.
Yeah.
And so then that helped us figure out a little mechanism, which is as soon as we started getting sideways, we started looking we had kind of a little signal and say, oh, let's step out and let's start talking about what the vocabulary means.
What was that signal?
You know, I don't even know.
But
it was just,
what was it like?
It was something like, I don't think we mean the same thing.
Oh, interesting.
And so there was a little phrase when it took all the tension out when in a disagreement, and let us get outside the disagreement a little bit and start talking about what we actually meant. I really think it's assumptions, and there's a bunch of fears and a bunch of desires, and as soon as it really is worth it, especially in a startup, to unpack all that stuff.
Hiten, from your perspective, metrics tool, you can answer questions, very specific, concrete questions. How do you help teams, startups resolve disagreements like that?
Yeah, so I'll take the different angle that John did. I think John focused on sort of the interpersonal approach to it, which is really important. And you know, there's things like 5 whys where you keep asking why 5 times to get to the root cause. So I think that's totally what you should do on that side. But in terms of what to do,
wait, do you do that with the person knowing you're going to ask 5 whys in a row, or are you more like a 3-year-old and you just keep asking?
Usually you get used to it. Right?
Okay.
If you do it with someone enough, they're like, yeah, he's going to do that. So I better ask myself that.
This is not a secret technique. It's like, oh, he's going to the 5 whys thing he learned from Hiten when he was at Stanford. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean,
okay,
you know, so that gets you to a root cause analysis. It's a root cause analysis. It's pretty popular now. But I would say that, you know, the thing I like to focus on when I'm talking to an entrepreneur is like asking them what problem they're actually trying to solve versus, you know, whatever solution they have in mind. So that's related to the why stuff, but it's really like, well, you know, someone might come and say, I want to build this app that's like a virtual dog leash on the iPhone somehow, right? And be like, well, okay, that's great. That's a solution, but what's the actual problem you're trying to solve? And when you can get people themselves to start having those conversations, then stuff becomes really obvious.
And the problem would be people often lose their phone and they need a way to retrieve it, just like the one that got left up here.
Yeah.
Right? The problem is people leave their phones around.
Where's my phone?
Yeah.
Right? So there's a problem
that
that
you
you're
have them
trying to solve.
reframe it.
Yeah. Focus on the problem, right? Not the solution. Because the solution, as John was saying, like that ends up changing, right? Like for example, I think with Instagram, they wanted to build a mobile app for entertainment, to have people entertain and communicate with each other. And you know, they were more like a heat-seeking missile to figure out what is that real problem that we can solve that, you know, I think just on another note, it's like you want to find that core problem. Yeah. You know, you might think that there's all these problems that people have, but it's really just about the core problem. And in their case, they discovered a behavior that was around sharing photos, sharing moments, essentially. And that was the core problem. And, you know, they solved it really well.
Let me put out an idea and have you guys respond to it. If it's a fundamental human problem, like people feel lonely or we want to connect grandparents and grandkids or something like that, You may think as innovators, oh, that problem's already been solved. There's nothing we can do to create a better solution in the space. My bias is, no, there's still opportunity. Am I right or am I wrong? How do you think about that? So if you go for a problem that's pretty fundamental, do you have people get more specific? Do you have them segmented out?
I personally think there's tons and tons of white space. I mean, I think anybody who's trying to be an entrepreneur or an investor in Silicon Valley, you've got to fundamentally be an optimist and fundamentally believe that. I feel like between tablets and smartphones and the cloud and all this stuff, like I feel like we're like reinventing the whole world right now, and I feel like a lot of the things are really not super clear. Like I tweet a lot. I'm not totally sure why I do that, and I have some reasons why I do that, and some reasons like it's
you tweet
goofy.
Stanford sports scores. Awesome.
I often tweet Stanford sports scores, which Reed actually I think it drives him crazy. He's like, why do you do that?
I appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you do. My partners don't all, but anyway, I think there's lots and lots of space. I think we're all trying to figure out what it's like. I think the best things. The way I think about it now is that the best apps and gadgets and things like that feel like they give us superpowers, like the ability to see around walls or know what you're thinking without being in your brain.
So it's like help people be the best version of themselves, a superpower version of themselves.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Hiten, thoughts?
Yeah, totally. Those are my favorite problems. Those are ones that people think are solved, so they don't even worry about them. And if you're taking the right approach to solve these problems and really understanding what's the core of the problem and how can this new, not even new, but how can we solve the problem based on where the world is today and where it's going with these new technologies and all that kind of stuff? I think those are actually the problems that I want to see more people focus on.
So to kind of fold it back into getting your team on board with baby steps, we've kind of stepped about it. Frame what you're doing in terms of the problem and set up hypotheses that you test against and do that and somehow get buy-in that people do that quickly, which I don't think we've totally resolved, 5 whys or whatever, but let's open up the floor for some questions. And these could be hypothetical or real issues. Go ahead and raise your hand and the mics will come to you. And while we're doing that, don't be shy, they're nice people. I will continue to, now John, I know you've made a couple investments in the health space. Mm-hmm. Hiten, you probably have health customers.
We have health customers, and I probably advise at least one health company, although I don't know which one. I just can't remember it. I have a bunch of those.
From your perspective, what makes solutions in health or innovation in health different? And people in the audience might be better qualified than you to answer this, so I'm kind of giving you one that, I just want to see what you have to say. Hiten, you go first.
Yeah, I can tackle it. There are real problems in health. That's what I got.
Real.
Right? And all you got to do is find them and solve them. And there's lots of ways, even like, waking up every morning on time. There's a solution to that now, and it's electronic. Okay. And it tracks data.
Okay.
Yeah, I think 2 things probably. The first thing is that I think health and our personal stuff, I think we have these narratives in our head about how we are that are almost never exactly right. Like I sleep better if I have a glass of wine before I go to bed. And they'd almost always be better and more informed if you had actual data. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we are super, super duper inconsistent as humans. And so like, I'm wearing my Nike FuelBand now, but shit, I was wearing like an Up for a while, and I was wearing a Fitbit for a while, and then a bunch of times I wasn't wearing anything. And so like my historical data record is all over the map. It's got holes in places and it's different in places. And so I think like technology is best when it's like comprehensive and has all the data across a longitudinal place. And so I think that we got to figure out how to make systems that can like deal with human inconsistency a little bit better.
Okay, great. Questions? I have tons of questions, but do raise your hand. I want to involve you. Okay, bring it to the front. There's one on the corner. While you're getting the mics, let me ask another question.
In the form of a poem.
Yeah, please stand up so I can see
but
you.
But it does have to be a poem.
I have a question waiting, but let's go here.
Okay, just a question. When your partner or people you're working with are a large health organization, or you're working with EHRs, or you are a large health organization, the mantra of, fail fast, fail often, don't worry if it doesn't work the first time, doesn't really work if you're concerned about security of patient records, FDA stuff, efficacy, medical malpractice, and so on. Is there a good way to meld or take this incremental approach to innovation within or dealing with large organizations or regulated organizations?
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, you don't have to take their records. You don't have to look at their data. You don't have to, do anything that's against kind of policy. All you have to do is talk to people. So if you talk to people about their problems, then you can at least identify what problems they have. And again, I'm a broken record, but you can do that in any industry. It doesn't matter what rules and regulations there are. And it's really just about figuring out what problems people actually have. And so I think you can get around all these policies just by saying, I'm just going to talk to people. Is that okay?
John, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for us, I've tended to like products that don't have those restrictions, that are attacking health or wellness in a consumer-oriented way. So apps in the app stores, like trying to help people take responsibility for their own things, as opposed to going through hospitals or bigger organizations. I think probably it's an issue of understanding the rules and trying to scope the axes which you're trying to innovate on.
Yeah, and I don't have a magical answer for that. I think, it's complicated. If it were not complicated, a lot of things would be solved by now. Let's go here.
Not on. Sorry.
So.
Can you hear me? Okay. Sounds like the dual fold solution is to, if you get overextended, to pivot and refocus a bit and take baby steps toward a redefined problem. But what if you've overextended because your problem is too large or your problem is difficult to define? So instead of having too many problems that your solution is addressing, it's almost, at least for us, I'm trying to speak in general terms, but for us, I feel like we're addressing a problem that people don't know they have until they've seen the solution. And to be more specific, self-knowledge. So people don't recognize that they don't know what makes them happy or what makes them well. So our tool essentially tries to help them figure out what makes them well. But if they don't know that they don't know it or they don't want to admit it, then how do we even figure out what the problem is? It's a weird kind of...
Yeah, you guys can handle that. Yeah, you got it, right? Thanks. Awesome.
Well,
I think the general question applies to a lot of people, actually.
Yeah, I think the general sort of the general answer is you got to think about the whole system and the whole problem. So a lot of times people will come in and they'll pitch us and they say, we've got this product or we're solving this problem. And then I say, well, how's anybody going to find this, or why is anybody going to use it? And they're like, well, we built this really great thing that solves this problem. And so what we end up doing is we end up talking a lot about what we call distribution, which is how do you get anyone to get your thing. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't recognize that. They say, well, we're going to solve the problem, and then we're going to figure out distribution later. What they don't realize is like getting people to care about it and getting people to use it, that's like 90% of the problem, as opposed to like building a great product which does something. So I think a lot of times it's reconceptualizing the product and trying to put yourself in the headspace of, my cousin Drew, who lives in Chicago and is a comedian. Like, how's he going to figure out he needs to get Instagram to take pictures or share? How's he, so just try to really flip it around and think like about distribution first is something we tell people a lot.
You want to take it? Should we go to another question?
No, I'll take it. I got something out. I guess you have to find a way to be honest with yourself and your team that you're actually not solving a real problem. Like my blunt, honest advice is you're probably not solving a real problem if it takes them to experience the product to understand they have a problem. And I think that goes back to the reframing. If you understand, understand how to explain it as a problem that someone actually has, and you're going to build a better product. And it probably means ripping apart the product and adjusting it.
We'll take this question, but I hope we get the question of how do you get engineers to take out code and features they've already developed. We'll come back to that question over here.
That's a great one.
So I hear a lot in this conference about developing a good technology and a superior product and taking baby steps and iteration. But what I don't hear, and I guess my question for you, I hope this is the right place to ask it, is I don't hear anybody talking about developing actual standards. So, we encode web pages with HTML, and there's standards for what certain tags mean inside the HTML. But there's no tags for the number of steps a person took in a day, or blood pressure, or things like this. Do you see an evolving landscape where we develop metrics for the interchange of data in between systems so that people aren't going off and recreating the wheel in all these different directions? And how do you see that evolving?
John, you've dealt in the world of diverse people cooperating and having to, so you kind of dealt in that world a lot, not so much help.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. I mean, the browser, being in a browser organization means you think a lot about interoperability and how to make things work. I would say that I think that in the world of technology, there's some funny characteristics. Like the first thing is like it tends to be winner take all. So there tend to be dominant players in technology, and there tends to be everybody else. And the dominant players they win in the market, and then they tend to be able to specify how things work. I think there are always reasons to do interop and standards. I think it's almost always the wrong thing to start from that point of view. I think you always learn more by having a product in market that actually gets used, then you're using a data orientation, then you figure out what you need, and you figure out who uses it. And without I think, trying to imagine that you know all the use cases, know all the interop before the things are in the market in a real way, I think is a little bit crazy, and I think it just doesn't work historically. And so as a result, people put things in the market, then you figure it out, and by the time that happens, you have a market, you have one or two dominant paradigms, and then in that case, I think it becomes more obvious who has to interoperate with whom and how to do it. So I think it's almost always better to have standards follow market adoption than try to imagine standards and work the technology backwards.
Hiten, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we've had to do that in our own business with KISSmetrics, where we've just been trying to be diligent about, and have been, and discovered some things around finding the essential main building block of what our product should be to allow for that kind of interoperability, or what I like to say is kind of more of future-proofing it. And I think that standards and things like that have a lot to do with that. So for us, we just found the fundamental building block of a business's data. And what we discovered is actually person-based customer data, which is the building block. So we have a very simple API, person, event, property, and I can go into detail some other time, but essentially that's all the API is. Everything's built on that. If we weren't diligent about finding the building blocks of this kind of data for businesses, we wouldn't have discovered it. So if you're diligent about that, I think it'll take a while, but you'll figure out what the standard needs to be.
Let's come back to the question of the psychology of engineers. We have an engineer, somebody who works a lot with engineers. Back in the day, I worked at HP, and I did an analysis of hardware engineers versus software engineers and looked at their styles and personalities. They're radically different. So we can't just generalize all engineers. But let's say it's the people you're working with who actually have their fingers on the code that, at the end of the day, determine what people use, for example. Hiten, we'll start with you first and then John next. How do you get engineers to cooperate? So let's say you're having I won't have you raise hands, but your engineers aren't cooperating. They have their point of view. They think they're right. Often, they're, what do you think?
It just means you're not on the same page. Like, I mean, in my experience, it just means for some reason you're not on the same page about what needs to be done and why it needs to be done.
So how do you get on the same page?
Keep asking why. Like, keep asking why about what you're building, about your market, about your customers, and try to find what real problems they have. I mean, this is, I think, the biggest challenge in developing any kind of business, whether it's hardware engineers, software engineers, whatever you require, is actually getting everyone on the same page. And that's the fundamental thing that would make a lot of those things not come up.
Am I making too big a deal about the divide between engineers and other people who are,
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I mean,
Okay.
I've worked with development shops, tons of engineers, talked to a lot of entrepreneurs that are engineers. Actually, the line I like to say is, I'm not an engineer, but I fake it. And that's mainly because I care to know. And some of the best engineers, they end up not even being the best at writing code, but they're good at understanding when you can help them as a non-engineer. So I guess part of your job is helping them understand when you can help them. But really, part of your job, if you're founder, CEO, or just entrepreneurial in nature inside of your company, is that getting everyone on the same page. If you can get everyone on the same page, those problems are greatly reduced, and it's more human stuff.
How do metric systems help engineers move forward in iterative ways? And how do you, if somebody doesn't have that mindset as an engineer, how do you get them there?
That's a great question. So It's actually the answer. The answer is like if you're debating something with an engineer, they'll understand this when you say, hey, let's just get some data. And you might need to repeat that 5 or 6 times in different instances for them to finally click. They're the ones that can get you the data in a lot of cases. So that's how I've found the click, which is a common ground can just be the data. And the data, you might think it's numbers, but in a lot of cases, it's actually a lot of qualitative data, like customers actually or users actually saying, hey, this is my problem, and being able to find the patterns and what those problems are. So don't just think of data as just like metrics and numbers, but it can also be data from customers, what they've said, and the patterns in that data.
Yeah, so I think you have to be really, really careful with this. So, I'm an engineer, but I'm also a designer, and, as we started getting designers into Mozilla, engineers, I prefer to use the word maker than engineers and designers. Because I think that we can all, I think everybody who thinks of themselves as a maker.
See, maker, cool.
Yeah, and nice. People who make things, right? Yeah. I think that's a more empowering word because nobody's got a degree in making, right? Nobody's got a maker degree, and we can all be makers if we're thinking about product, thinking about users, and making things. So I think it's a less of a divide and more of a pulling together. But the thing is, if a designer said, "Well, I think you should implement X," and the developer says, "Well, I don't think so," and then the designer says, "Well, but here's data that shows you should. Here's the metric." And very often the engineer in that case will say, yes, of course. Now the trap that is the next time the designer says, I think we should do this, the engineer says, well, let's show me the data.
That's right.
And that's not always the right answer. Because often you're trying to make an intuitive leap or get past a thing. You're trying to get off this, kind of get out of this cul-de-sac. And so you have to be really, really careful about creating a culture where the engineers say, we'll implement whatever you design as long as you have the data that says it's the right thing to design. Because that's just a trap, I think, organizationally.
It's true.
How do you create that culture then?
I think what you have to do is, I think you have to be more honest about which things are, like I said, which things are testable and which things are not. And which decisions are data-driven and which things are not. Okay. And then how the organization is going to make decisions and how you're going to behave.
Other questions from the audience? Okay, we're going to wrap up here. Why don't you guys, so last question is this. Put yourself in the position of people in the audience. They go back either a small company or a large company. They walk in the door. I guess you'll get back on Monday, perhaps, whatever. How did they start the conversation about, wow, I went to an event on baby steps, and we need to start doing things differently? How would you do that? To go back and say, how would you start that? Would you call an all-hands meeting? Would you do it little by little? Would you have them watch video? What would you do?
I'd just start sneaking it in every conversation I can until more people had buy-in about.
Would you go person by person, or just in every meeting?
I think situation by situation might be better than person by person until people start hearing that broken record that you are and start buying into it. Baby steps, find opportunities within your work already. Otherwise, you're trying to create massive change all at once, and that's very difficult.
And that's not a baby step.
Right.
Interesting. John.
And I would actually, I suggest you be the change, basically. So I think that, coming in and telling people, all right, come to this conference, they told us to do baby steps. Let me tell you about how we're going to do baby steps. Telling people about how you're going to change is probably almost never the way to do it. And so, say you decide that you've got to stop using cell phones and stop reading your mail during meetings or while you're on stage. And I think the way to do that is just stop doing that. That's the first thing to do. And sometimes you have to be slightly flamboyant about it.
Slightly what?
Slightly flamboyant about it.
Okay.
Just have a little box on your desk you stick your phone into before you go in a meeting. Okay. Or suddenly start carrying around a notebook made of paper. Right, or whatever, right? And so I think actually little props and things like that where people notice and ask you and pull what the hell are you doing, and pull it from you, I think is a more effective way than saying, okay guys, I'm going to drop some knowledge on y'all about how to change.
Very good. Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you guys for taking time out of your schedule, coming this way. Can you hang out here after during the break and chat with people? So if you want to do individual free consultation, I really appreciate you coming. Thank you very much. Thank you. We're back here at 4:32, last session, the future of baby steps in health innovation. See you back here in about 28 minutes.